a family raised only to become vessels for a demon's awakening. The film opens by showing a death announcement for a woman named Ellen, who passed away at the age of 78 due to a chronic illness she had suffered from for a long time. Ellen left behind her daughter Annie, her son-in-law Steve, and her 2 grandchildren, Peter and Charlie. Ellen's funeral was scheduled to take place the following day and would be attended only by close family members. After this introduction, the story shifts its focus to Annie and her family. The scene changes to Steve, who is trying to wake up his 2 children so they can attend their grandmother Ellen's funeral. At the funeral home, Annie is seen delivering a speech in which she briefly talks about her late mother's life.
She was also incredibly stubborn. She was a very difficult woman to read. She had private rituals, private friends. I know my mom would be very touched.
Once the funeral's over, the family returns to their home. In her daily life, Annie works as a miniature artist, often creating detailed miniature scenes inspired by her own family life. One day, as she is about to leave her workspace, Annie notices a box containing her late mother's belongings. Driven by curiosity, she opens the box and accidentally discovers a book filled with notes about spiritualism that once belonged to Ellen. Annie begins to read it and finds a handwritten message from Ellen on the first pages. In the note, Ellen apologizes to Annie for everything she was never able to explain to her, asks Annie not to hate her, and claims that the sacrifices they made would eventually be rewarded. The message leaves Annie confused as she does not understand what Ellen meant at all. She closes the book and puts it back into the box. As Annie is about to turn off the light and leave the room, she suddenly sees a faint shadow resembling Ellen standing in the corner. Startled, Annie quickly turns the light back on, but the figure is gone. Still shaken, she looks at one of her miniatures depicting herself breastfeeding while her mother stands beside her, and she immediately turns the miniature around. The next day, while Charlie is at school, a bird suddenly crashes into the classroom window. During recess, Charlie finds the bird lying dead. With a blank expression, she cuts off the bird's head. Across the street from the school, a strange woman is seen staring at Charlie and waving at her, but Charlie does not recognize her at all. Meanwhile, Annie is shown at home. As she walks past Ellen's old bedroom, the door suddenly opens on its own. Annie enters the room and notices a triangular symbol drawn on the floor. After this unsettling incident, Steve decides to lock the bedroom door to prevent anyone from entering it again. Not long after, Annie attends a support group meeting meant for people who want to share stories about losing their loved ones. When it is Annie's turn to speak, she opens up about the sadness she is currently experiencing. Annie explains that her family has always been plagued by misfortune. She talks about her father, who died after deliberately starving himself for unclear reasons, and about her older brother who died young by suicide and had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. Before his death, Annie's brother claimed that their mother, Ellen, was trying to put someone else inside his body. Annie also mentions that Ellen herself has now died from a long-term illness. She admits that she had a complicated and distant relationship with her mother, describing Ellen as a difficult and hard-to-understand person. Ellen once showed an obsessive interest in Annie's first child, Peter, which frightened Annie and led her to deliberately keep Peter away from her mother to protect him. However, when Annie's second child, Charlie, was born, Annie allowed Ellen to have full involvement in raising her. She did this out of guilt for having kept Peter away from Ellen. Despite their strained relationship, Annie admits that she did love her mother.
I felt guilty again. I didn't let her anywhere near me when I had my son. She's completely manipulative.
And we were pretty much estranged before that, so accusing her of putting people inside him. And when he was 16, he hanged himself in my mother's bedroom, and my father died when I was a baby, but I did love her.
That night, Peter receives an invitation from his friend to attend a party. He lies to Annie by saying that the party is merely a school barbecue and asks to borrow her car. Annie allows him to go, but only on the condition that he takes Charlie with him.
Hey. Oh, just like a school barbecue thing? Do you think I could maybe borrow one of the cars today?
You gonna take your sister? Have you asked
faster?
Outside the house, Charlie is seen staring out into the yard, where a figure can be seen sitting inside a circle of fire. Shortly after, Annie approaches Charlie and tells her that she must go to the party with her brother. Reluctantly, Peter leaves for the party with Charlie. At the party, Peter tries to relax and socialize with his friends while Charlie stands alone and eats a piece of cake from the table. Unbeknownst to her, the cake contains nuts. Soon after, Charlie begins to feel pain in her throat and struggles to breathe. It is revealed that Charlie has a severe nut allergy that can trigger an asthma attack. Panicking, she approaches Peter and tells him that her throat feels swollen. Peter immediately realizes that the cake Charlie ate contained nuts and caused her allergic reaction.
What's up?
I think my throat's getting bigger. It's hard to breathe.
Without thinking, he picks her up and rushes her to the car, intending to take her to the hospital. During the drive, Charlie writhes in pain while desperately trying to breathe. Peter, overwhelmed with panic, speeds down the road. Suddenly, he sees the carcass of a deer lying in the middle of the road, causing him to instinctively swerve sharply to the right. At the same moment, Charlie has her head out of the window, gasping for air. A utility pole on the side of the road strikes her head, severing it instantly.
It's okay, Charlie. We're almost to the hospital, okay?
Peter freezes in shock, unable to comprehend what has just happened. When he arrives home, Peter is consumed by overwhelming guilt and trauma. He cannot bring himself to tell his parents what happened and remains silent. The next morning, Annie discovers Charlie's headless body still inside the car. Even after Charlie's funeral, her head is never found. Charlie's horrific death deepens the grief and trauma experienced by Annie, Peter, and Steve. Annie channels her emotions into her art, creating a miniature scene depicting Charlie's death. This enrages Steve, who cannot understand how Annie could recreate such a tragedy. Annie calmly explains that this is her way of coping with the trauma. At this point, Annie begins to show clear signs of severe depression. Her grief, loss, and emotional pressure slowly destabilize her mental state.
You're not planning on letting him see that, are you? Jesus Christ, Annie.
No, it's a neutral view of the accident. It's not about him.
How do you think he's gonna feel when he sees that? Calm, stay, whatever you want. I don't really give a shit.
During a family dinner, Annie lashes out at Peter and blames him for Charlie's death. Peter, in turn, blames Annie, arguing that if she had not forced Charlie to go to the party, the accident would never have happened.
I am your mother! Don't you swear at me, you little shit! Well, now your sister is dead! She is gone forever! And I know you're in pain, and I know it was an accident, but you can't take responsibility for anything! Maybe, Dan, we could do something with this. If you could have just said, I'm sorry, and I can't forgive. Do you understand?
So why was she there? She didn't want to go to the party.
I said, stop right now.
From this moment on, the relationships within Annie's family begin to fracture. One day, while shopping for supplies for her work, Annie unexpectedly meets a woman named Joan, whom she recognizes from the support group meeting. They start talking, and Joan soon shares something unsettling. She claims that she has the ability to summon the spirits of the dead. Annie initially dismisses her, believing Joan is unstable, but Joan persists and eventually convinces Annie to visit her apartment to witness the ritual firsthand. At Joan's apartment, she performs a spirit summoning ritual, claiming that she can communicate with the spirit of her own grandson. In front of Annie's eyes, a board and a small glass begin to move on their own, as if a presence is truly in the room. Annie is both terrified and shocked by what she sees. She hurriedly leaves, unsure of what she has just witnessed. Before Annie goes, Joan gives her a piece of paper containing instructions for the ritual. Joan explains that before performing it, Annie must recite the chant written on the paper, and that during the ritual, every member of Annie's family must be present.
I'm sorry, can we stop? What?
Your whole family needs to be in the house. It's to make things start. Medium had me read it first. Read this out loud.
After returning home, Annie cannot stop thinking about the spirit summoning ritual Joan performed earlier. She feels confused, yet deeply curious about whether what she witnessed was truly real. Sometime later, Annie notices a trail of ants crawling inside her bedroom. She follows them, only to be confronted by a horrifying sight. Peter's severed head lying on his bed, completely covered in ants. Terrified, Annie suddenly wakes up and realizes that the gruesome scene was only a nightmare. Even so, the fear and unease linger long after she opens her eyes. Not long after, Annie decides to perform the spirit summoning ritual herself in an attempt to contact Charlie, following the instructions Joan gave her. She invites Steve and Peter to join her so that the whole family is present. The ritual begins, and to Annie's shock, it actually works. Annie, who was never someone who easily believed in supernatural things, becomes overwhelmed with joy after realizing that she has successfully summoned Charlie's spirit. However, the situation quickly turns disturbing when Annie suddenly appears to become possessed. Her voice changes, and she starts speaking as if Charlie is talking through her body. Seeing this, Steve and Peter panic. Peter becomes extremely frightened, and Steve reacts by splashing Annie with water, causing the spirit to leave her body.
Dad, I don't like this.
What's happening?
Please stop.
Hello?
Mom! Why are you scaring me? Make it stop!
After this incident, Peter begins to experience increasingly strange events. He constantly feels as if he's being watched and even sees his reflection smiling back at him in a mirror, despite the fact that he himself is not smiling at all. At the same time, Annie starts to notice that many unsettling things are happening inside the house. While walking around, she sees Charlie's sketchbook moving on its own as if something invisible is drawing inside it. The drawings depict Peter's face in a grotesque and disturbing form. Annie begins to suspect that these events are caused by Charlie's spirit, which they had summoned during the ritual. That night, while Peter is asleep, he suddenly wakes up feeling a strange presence in his room. When he looks toward the corner, he sees the shadowy figure of Charlie standing there. Moments later, Peter feels his neck being strangled by an unseen force.
Charlie?
When he fully regains awareness, he sees Annie standing right in front of him, making it appear as though she is the one choking him. Panicking, Annie explains that she heard Peter screaming and rushed to his room to check on him. Annie then takes Charlie's sketchbook and flips through its pages, finding numerous sketches of Peter's face. This deeply frightens her. She decides to burn the book, but as soon as she tries, the sweater she is wearing suddenly catches fire as well, as if there is a direct connection between her and the book. Shocked and confused, Annie rushes to Joan's apartment, hoping to find answers to the terrifying events. However, when she arrives, Joan is gone. Instead, Annie finds something deeply disturbing on Joan's table. A photograph of Peter, with his face circled, placed at the center of a triangular symbol identical to the one Annie once saw in Ellen's bedroom. Annie also notices that the doormat in front of Joan's apartment looks exactly like the ones her mother used to make. Annie recognizes Ellen's unique knitting style and becomes certain that only Ellen could have made it. Growing increasingly suspicious, Annie returns home and searches through the boxes of her mother's belongings stored in the attic. Inside, she finds several doormats bearing the names of her own family members. She also discovers old photographs revealing that Joan had known Ellen for a long time. Annie then realizes that Joan and Ellen wore identical necklaces. At this point, Annie finally understands that all the strange and horrifying events that have happened to her family are not coincidences, but part of a long-planned scheme. From the book she finds, Annie concludes that Ellen's rituals were not merely attempts to communicate with spirits, but rituals meant to summon the demon Paimon in exchange for wealth and power. Ellen was the leader of this cult, and even more horrifying, she used her own family as sacrifices. The next day, Steve receives a shocking email from the funeral home stating that Ellen's grave has been desecrated and her body is missing. Steve chooses not to tell Annie, fearing that it would worsen her already fragile mental state. Elsewhere in the house, Annie begins to notice a foul smell coming from the attic. She goes upstairs to investigate and is horrified to find Ellen's decaying corpse lying there. She also discovers a demonic symbol associated with the worship of Paimon carved into the attic wall. Meanwhile, at school, Peter is sitting alone on a bench when Joan suddenly appears from a distance and starts shouting strange words at him as if chanting a spell.
Peter! Get out! Peter! I expel you! Dagony! Saturday!
It becomes clear that Joan is actively performing a ritual targeting Peter. The terror escalates when, during class, Peter's eyes suddenly turn red, his face becomes tense, and he appears to be possessed by something. The entity controlling him repeatedly slams his head against his desk, leaving Peter traumatized and terrified.
Peter, what are you doing here?
After this incident, Steve picks Peter up and brings him home. In a state of panic, Annie tells Steve that Ellen's body is in the attic. At first, Steve does not believe her, but he is forced to accept the truth when he sees Ellen's headless corpse with his own eyes. Instead of comforting Annie, Steve accuses her of being responsible for bringing Ellen's body into the house. A violent argument breaks out between them, with Steve accusing Annie of stealing Ellen's corpse from the grave. Annie desperately tries to explain that their family is being cursed by her own mother. She shows Steve Charlie's sketchbook, explaining that if the book is burned, the person who burns it will also be burned. Steve refuses to believe her and becomes convinced that Annie has completely lost her sanity. In desperation, Annie throws the book into the fire. To everyone's shock, Steve's body immediately bursts into flames, killing him. Annie stands frozen in horror, her face blank with shock, before she suddenly appears to become possessed by an unseen force. Several hours later, Peter finally wakes up from unconsciousness. He searches the house for his parents, only to find his father's charred corpse. He then notices a naked man standing silently in the corner of the room, wearing a horrifying smile on his face. Not long after, Annie appears with a terrifying expression and begins chasing Peter.
Dad?
Overcome with panic, Peter runs and hides inside the attic of the house. From below, Annie repeatedly slams her head against the attic door while screaming uncontrollably. When things finally fall silent, Peter looks around and notices several lit candles arranged in a circle, with his own photograph placed at the center. As Peter looks upward, he witnesses an utterly horrifying sight: Annie floating in the air while slowly cutting her own throat. Terrified beyond reason, Peter leaps out of the attic window, falls to the ground, and appears to die instantly. Moments later, a strange light enters Peter's body, causing him to come back to life. Weak and disoriented, Peter stands up and sees his mother's corpse levitating toward the treehouse in the backyard. He follows it inside. Within the treehouse, Peter finds a group of naked people worshiping a statue that bears Charlie's severed head. They are all kneeling, while Joan addresses Peter and calls him by a new name, Paimon. Peter is then crowned and proclaimed the great King Paimon, replacing his deceased sister. At this moment, the real Peter is gone, and his body has been completely taken over by the demon Paimon. It is finally revealed that everything has been carefully planned by Ellen long before her death. As the leader of the cult that worshipped the demon Paimon, Ellen had long intended to summon Paimon into the physical world. However, she needed a perfect vessel for the demon. The vessel had to be a healthy male body, and before that, the soul inhabiting the body had to be completely broken. In the past, Ellen attempted to use Annie's older brother as Paimon's vessel. She deliberately drove her own husband into madness and suicide in order to create severe trauma that would destroy her son's mind. While this did shatter Annie's brother mentally, he ultimately refused to become a vessel for Paimon. To prevent Ellen from using his body, he chose to hang himself. Ellen's efforts did not stop there. After Annie gave birth to Peter, Ellen tried to get close to him while he was still a baby, hoping he would be more easily claimed by Paimon. However, her attempt failed once again because Annie and Steve deliberately kept Peter away from her. When Charlie was born, Annie finally allowed Ellen to be involved in raising her. At that point, Charlie's body became the only available option. From infancy, Ellen bound Paimon to Charlie by exposing her to Paimon's symbols and instilling strange habits in her. However, because Charlie was female, her body could only serve as a temporary vessel. Paimon never fully resided within Charlie. From the very beginning, the true goal was to make Peter the final vessel for Paimon. Ellen's death was the first step of the plan. Charlie's death was also premeditated as part of the process to transfer Paimon from Charlie's body into Peter's. Without Charlie's death, the ritual to move the demon into a new vessel could not be completed. Charlie's brutal death also inflicted deep trauma on Annie, Steve, and Peter, slowly destroying their mental stability. Exploiting Annie's fragile state, Joan entered her life and gained her trust. Once Annie trusted her, Joan deliberately taught her how to summon Charlie's spirit. In reality, this ritual was never meant to summon Charlie, but to call forth the demon Paimon. Joan also provided the chant and intentionally instructed Annie to perform the ritual with both Peter and Steve present. Through this process, Paimon grew increasingly closer to Peter, gradually eliminating those closest to him while subjecting him to relentless terror. The constant fear and psychological torment were meant to completely shatter Peter's soul, leaving it empty and ready to be inhabited by the demon. Even after Ellen's death, every step unfolded exactly as she had planned. Her ambition to summon Paimon was finally fulfilled, but the price she paid was the lives of her own family. Now, after the demon Paimon has successfully obtained a new vessel, the cult that worships him will gain the great wealth and power they have long desired. With this horrifying plan fulfilled, the film comes to an end.